My name is Ron Hilliard. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. I want to welcome you, whether you're worshiping with us at home or whether you're here in person. We're glad that you are part of our church. We hope you find a place to connect and that this begins to feel more and more like family to you. So we have been going through a sermon series called A Meal with Jesus. And we've been looking at passages in the Gospel of Luke that focus on the meals that Jesus has with people. Sometimes he is the guest, sometimes he is providing the meal, sometimes he is the host. And these meal stories reveal to us the nature of the gospel, reveal to us the calling of the church, and what the practice of hospitality around a meal shows how we as the church today should be interacting with our culture. And so today we're going to be in Luke chapter 15. Pastor Jared started last week in this chapter, and he preached on the first two of three parables that are in a row. So here's the setting. Here's what's going on. Jesus is with a whole group of people, and there are two divisions in the house. There are the tax collectors and sinners. And they are leaning in. They are there and they're hanging on every word that Jesus shares. They want to know more about him. They're intrigued by not only what he says as he teaches, but they're actually really interested in just who he is as a person. What about these miracles that he's doing? What's going on? There's nobody like this that we've ever met. Now, these are the tax collectors and sinners. Then there's group two. They're not gathered around Jesus. They're probably standing along the walls, and they have their arms crossed, and they're kind of glaring at Jesus and at the people. They're there not because they want to hear him, but because they want to catch him saying something wrong. And not only are they kind of listening to catch him, but they're also grumbling and talking amongst themselves. So probably they're not even listening. And they're like, can you believe this guy? Look who he hangs out with. They're sinners. They're tax collectors. They're the scum of our culture. And not only is he hanging out with them, he should know the kind of people they are, but he's actually sitting down with them and having meals with them. There's no way that this guy Jesus can be a prophet and do that. And not only are they probably complaining about Jesus, but I'm thinking they're also making comments about the people. Look at them. We're so much better than them. Thank you, God, that we're not like them. Thank you that we're in the know and that we are pure and obedient, not like these people. And so in response to this whole scene that's going on, Jesus tells three stories. The first one, and we talked about this last week, was about a shepherd who leaves the sheep to go search for one sheep that's lost. And he searches and he searches and he searches. And when he finds it, he calls out to all of his friends and he says, come rejoice with me because the sheep that was lost is found. And then the second story was about a woman who lost a coin. And she cleans out her closets and she moves her furniture and she sweeps the whole house looking and looking and looking for her lost coin. And when she finds it, she calls out to all of her friends, come rejoice with me, for this coin that was lost has been found. We have to celebrate. And my guess is that every time he kind of winds that story down, the sheep, we have to celebrate, he looks at the people standing on the walls, the coin that was lost, and he looks right at the people. And he says, we have to celebrate. We have to celebrate. And then he tells the third story. Only in this story, it's not about a sheep and it's not about a coin. It's about a person. It's about people. And so we're kind of hitting closer and closer to home. And I invite you now to hear that story. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there, he squandered his property in wild living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, so that he began to be in need. He went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. And he would gladly have filled himself with the food that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying with hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and he went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran and he put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost, and now is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now, his older son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And the slave replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' And then that older son became angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, and he has been found.'" So the kingdom, according to this passage and others in Scripture, is about celebrating. It's about having a feast. It's about throwing a party. Isaiah says that when the Messiah comes, it'll be like a feast with rich foods and fine wine. Revelation says that when Jesus comes, it will be like the marriage supper of the Lamb. And now we see here where Jesus is saying when lost people come home, when dead people become alive again, we have to celebrate and rejoice. The kingdom is about celebration. I was thinking about the most joyous meal I have ever eaten, and it happened in prison. I've been part of Kairos prison ministry in the past, and as part of this, the followers of Jesus would come together and they would take about 8 weeks to get ready. They would pray and they would plan the weekend and they would work on their talks and they would practice their music and they would get organized. And then on Thursday night, they would enter into the institution. And the prison chaplain has chosen the participants for that weekend. And there's this coming together of those who live inside Glades Correctional or Broward Correctional and those who come from the outside. And I got to tell you, it is incredibly awkward. First of all, the residents there, they don't even like each other. They don't even know who do you trust, who can you talk to, who has your back, who doesn't have your back. So they are leery of each other. And then you got all these religious people coming from churches, and they're here for the weekend, and they're like, who are these people? Why are they here? What are we going to do? What's this going to be like? Are these people I can trust? Are these people that I even like? And people begin to introduce themselves, and then over the course of the next 72 hours, people from inside and people from the outside actually become friends. And there is this incredible transformation that takes place as people sit around tables and share meals together, as they sing, as they pray, as they laugh, as they cry, as they have food, and then more food, and then more food, and then more food. The way the weekend works is every time someone walks out of the room, they put more food on each table. And it's seriously a 72-hour party that's going on. And then on Saturday night, there's sort of this culmination of a feast. The room is decorated when the participants are out of it, and so when they come in, there's a transformation of the space that has taken place. And then the prison chaplain gives permission to bring in food from the outside. And I just have to tell you, it's so much different than the food that they normally eat. Okay? And I know, like last time I mentioned this in a sermon, I got a couple letters because somebody worked for the prison system and took exception to the quality of the food that I mentioned. But let me just say this, it's all like white. Bland, starchy. And so now on this Saturday night, they actually have salad, and they have vegetables, and they have barbecue chicken or barbecue ribs and baked potatoes, and they have like homemade cookies or homemade cake or pie. And if we can't bring in homemade stuff, we get it catered from a restaurant. So you're getting food that for some of these people, it's been years and years and years since they've been able to taste it. And there's nothing like the joy that is experienced as we sit around tables and as a feast takes place. And the whole weekend, there's laughter and music and there's dancing and it's just like an incredible experience. It's like the feast that the Father throws in Luke chapter 15 when the prodigal comes home. It's a picture of the kingdom. It's what God talks about in the Old Testament. It's what we look forward to in the New Testament. God's kingdom is a celebration. And when Jesus tells this story, he's talking to the tax collectors and sinners, and he's offering them a picture of what waits for them. But he's also looking at those that are standing against the wall, and he's inviting them to also come and participate. Because here's the thing, whether you're lost in a far country or whether you're staying at home and trying to earn God's love by being good, both the younger son and the older needed God's grace. And in this story, both are invited to come to the party. Now, the younger son, and I think we relate or understand this, he basically says to his father, I don't want to have anything to do with you. I wish you were dead, because then I could go ahead and get my inheritance. In fact, Dad, why don't you just give me my inheritance now and let's get it over with? Then I can just go ahead and leave and we'll just pretend you're dead. And to the amazement of everybody that's hearing this story, the father says, okay. And so the son packs up and he leaves, and he spends everything, it says, he squanders it in wild living. And then he gets a job feeding pigs. And then he's so hungry he wants to eat the pig food. And he realizes, wow, my father, I could go home. Now, the older son is just as lost. Only he hasn't run away geographically, but his heart is hardened and closed. And his heart is a long way from home. He's upset that God is being gracious and God is being generous. And he says, I've obeyed the rules and I've done all the right things. Tim Keller says that for people who choose this path, it's another way of distancing ourselves from God, because we can then control God. If I'm good, then God has to bless me. If I do all the right things, then God is obligated to take care of me. And it's just our own way of trying to earn God's grace, and it's completely missing the mark. Now, here's the interesting thing. There's probably more older sons in this group than there are younger. And so it should cause us to kind of pay attention and to actually think about, man, how close am I to my God, my Father? Do I understand the grace that he offers? Do I understand that I'm loved just as much as my other brothers and sisters? Do I understand that I don't have to earn God's favor, that I don't deserve it? It's a gift. It's free. The main character in this story is the father. And I think what happens sometimes in church is we get so busy looking at older and younger brothers and sisters that we miss the father. Because I know there are those that look at the family that gathers here and they're thinking like, there are a lot of religious people there. And it's all about rules. What you can do, what you can't do, what you should do. And we could get so caught up in looking at the religious people and say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. That we completely miss the Father. And I think there's a lot of religious people that are looking at the younger brothers and sisters and going like, look at them. Like, they're all about themselves. They just want to do what they want to do. They don't want to follow the rule. Look at them. It's wild. And it's like, I don't want my church to look like that. And they're so busy looking at the younger brothers and sisters that they don't look at the Father. So what this parable does is it invites us to look at the Father. Because he's the main character. He's the one that's lavish in his love and who spends his grace extravagantly. That's why Tim Keller named his book The Prodigal God. He wasted his grace lavishly, showering it upon both older and younger. So in both cases, they both needed to understand the Father's love. So the younger son is away in the far country, and he realizes how far away he is, that he had no desire to be in relationship with the Father. But here's the thing. No matter how far he ran, he came to understand that his Father still loved him. He's in the far country, and he's sitting in a pig pen, and he says, my Father has enough for me. He says, my Father will accept me and let me come home. And I think it's interesting that God puts within us this remembrance of who he is. I was talking to a person just this week who said, for 4+ years, I was mad at God. And I didn't want to come to church. I didn't want to be around church. I didn't pray. I didn't want to worship. I didn't want to have anything to do with God because I was mad at him. And I didn't let my husband come to church. I let my kids come to church. And then she said, but I always knew, no matter how angry I was, that God still knew where I was, and that he still cared about me, and that he still loved me. And gradually, she came back home. When the father sees the son coming, he runs out. And the son has rehearsed this speech. I'm so sorry, I want to be like a hired person, which in essence is he's saying is, I want to get a job and I want to pay you back for what I took from you. And when he starts his speech, he says, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And sometimes I think for those who drift far away or who run away or who live so much of their lives in a distant land, we begin to feel that we're unworthy. God would never let me come home. God would never love me because of what I've done or how I've lived or what I've said. And we come to God with this sense of unworthiness and then pair it with, and I want to earn my way back to you, God. And in this story, when the younger son comes home, the father cuts him off before he can say, let me earn my way back. And when he says, I'm unworthy, what the father said is, get the robe, get the ring, get the sandals. And in the mention of unworthiness, what the father does is he demonstrates, you are not unworthy. You can't earn your way. You're not a hired servant. You are my child. And so put on the robe and put on the ring and put on the sandals because you are now home. And so Jesus looks around and he says, and that's why we celebrate. That's why we have a feast. That's why we do what we do. Because people who were lost have been found and people who were dead are made alive again. We have to celebrate. Now, with the older son, the one that's good and does everything right and deserves God's blessing because of how he obeys, he basically treats his father rudely. He refuses to come in. He lectures his father in front of the guests. He basically has this incredible negative attitude toward his father, which reveals that while he had stayed home, he really wasn't home. In his heart, he wasn't in a relationship with his father. See, that's what religious people do. They follow the rules, but they don't have that relationship. And so while the older son is throwing his pity party, while he's saying, I'm better than him, you don't love me as much as him, you don't do anything good for me, I slave away for you, the father goes out to him and pleads with him to come in. And he's angry. He's angry at his father. Maybe he's angry at himself. And it all comes out. This is unfair. I work all the time. In fact, he was so busy working that he didn't even know a party was going on. His brother had come home. He didn't even know. The music started. He didn't even know. They killed the calf and they're cooking it and he could smell it, but he didn't even know because he was so focused on being good and being right and being holy and being obedient. He missed the party. And then when the father comes out and says, you come in, you're my child too, I love you too, everything I have, I've already given it to you. And the story ends, and we don't know whether he comes in or not. Do you think he does? Do you think that older brother who was all tied up and doing the right thing, do you think he decides, you know, my dad's right. He does love me. I'm going to come in. Or does he just stay outside and sulk? That's kind of the invitation. For younger sons and older sons, for younger daughters and older daughters, for those who run away from God in the way they live or those who run away from God in their hearts. The invitation is to come to the party. And so church is to be a place where people from the far country are welcomed home, where people who have run far away in their actions or far away in their hearts are welcomed home, where the grace of God is spread out on a table and where people are said, come and have a feast on the grace of God. It's for you, and it's for you, and it's for you. That's what I love about Pastor Jared and his focus on, we want to be a place that practices hospitality, that focuses on the far country and welcoming people home, and who then celebrate. That's what church is to be. And whether you see it or not, there are celebrations happening, and there are parties that are happening, and there are lost people coming home, and there are hard-hearted people having their hearts opened, and God is doing this in our midst. My prayer is that you have ears to hear the music, and you have eyes to see the celebration, and that all of us will join in. You know, one last thing, and I got this from Keller's book, The Prodigal God. In this trilogy of parables, when the sheep is lost, someone goes to search for it. When the coin is lost, someone goes to search for it. And when the son is lost, nobody goes to search for him. He eventually comes home, and the father's waiting. But what Keller suggests is that it should have been the older brother who went to find his lost younger brother. See, that's what happens when we become the older child in this parable. We forget about the lost, and we forget about our brothers and sisters that are in a far country. And so part of our calling for all of us, for you and for me, is to be people who will go to a far country, who will get dirty in the pig pen, so that our brothers and our sisters can be invited to come home. Church must never be an inward-focused, let's just have a party together, but we must always be outward-focused and looking for the far country and who is in the far country. And there are people that are in the far country of disease and in the far country of death and in the far country of economic instability and in the far country of poverty and the far country of food insecurity, in addition to the far country in our hearts. And so it could be a person sitting next to you that's in the far country, or it could be a person that's miles away. Either way, we are called to be people who recognize the far country and who are willing to go there. That's what church is to be. Okay, last story. I just read this in Christianity Today magazine. There are two Young Life leaders in San Antonio, Texas. And Young Life is an organization that is going into high schools, middle schools, and high schools, and the far country of school cafeterias and athletic events. And the whole idea for Young Life leaders is you go. And so these two men in San Antonio were kind of starting a Young Life ministry, and they were having a little bit of a struggle when the immigration crisis happened to hit, and there were 1,500 young boys that were unaccompanied immigrants who were put in the Coliseum in San Antonio, ages 13 to 17. Their parents weren't with them. The government was their mom and dad. And they were there. And so these two Young Life guys thought, why don't we go hang out with these kids? 1,500, ready audience right there. And so through Catholic Charities, they got permission to go in. And they just started going in and hanging out. And they did some Bible studies. They had one of their donors that gave 700 Bibles. They took those in and distributed them. And each Bible had 3 stickers. It had a human trafficking hotline number. It had a sticker with Young Life's contact information. And it had a Bible verse, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created, and it had a blank. And the guys had them, the students, the boys, fill their name in that blank. In the beginning, God created you and said it was good. They collected clothes and shoes for 1,500 boys. And they gave them all kinds of stuff so that they would feel like kids again and that someone actually cared about them. They had a worship night, and they got the government the Homeland Security they fast-tracked the volunteer background checks so that they could have a big worship night. And they had musicians and volunteers that came in, and they said all throughout that night of music, the boys were on their knees in tears. Eventually, they began to be shipped out to family or to longer-term institutions. And as they were going, Homeland Security threw a pizza party for the boys. Now, that's how amazing God is, that he can get Homeland Security in the United States to throw a party for these young boys from Mexico. And before they left, they were reminded that God was a good father to them, and that God was with them, and that God knew where they were. Because the two men that were doing this ministry wanted those boys to know that they had a God that loved them and a God who was watching over them. And that what they were going through was not a mistake, but that the seeds of the gospel had been planted in their lives, and they were taking it out into our country. I tell you what, that's what church should look like. That we go out and we love the people that need to be loved. Whether they're right next to us and have hard hearts, or whether they're a long way away. And that we invite them to come home. And when they do, we have a party. And we celebrate. Because people who are dead have come back to life. And because people who are lost have been found. Amen.